Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Evil the Monkey here, back with another build video. And this one's for Sharen using the Ambushed Transient mod, which I gotta say has been working incredibly well with their reworked kit. Since it relies so heavily on invisibility, it turns out being permanently invisible just works even better. Since not only does this allow you to continuously proc the marks which allow for insane damage, but since you're permanently invisible, it also removes the clumsiness of having to activate your invisibility every time you do want to proc one of those marks. Now, if you guys don't know what Ambush does, let me go ahead and throw it up on the screen there. Go ahead and pause and read if you need to. But not only does this allow you to just have insane survivability because you're permanently invisible, and the only thing that can see you is a colossi while you're invisible, it also allows for insane damage, since not only are you getting the bonus damage for your invisibility, but because you continuously proc the marks, you're getting all the benefits from proccing those marks, which are insanely high damage. Or just insanely high damage increases for like tyrants and colossi and, well, bosses. Which pretty much allows you to delete anything off the map with relative ease. But that's enough of me yapping, let's go and get you guys straight into that build. And as always, we'll go ahead and start off with our module section where I'll go ahead and break down and explain why we're using each mod and how it fits into the build. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. And starting off our mods will be our cooldown section. Now the first module we'll go over here is Nimble Fingers. Now why are we actually running Nimble Fingers? Well, this is just your basic cooldown module with no downside and gives you quite a bit of cooldown, so it's just an always easy one to run. Then our next one is going to be MP Conversion. This one actually gives you the highest amount of cooldown out of any module, with the only downside being minus max MP, which we're fine with because you don't have any MP issues in this build, so losing some max MP really won't affect anything at all. And with these two modules, in combination with Sharen's second ability, which gives her another 30% cooldown while you're invisible, brings Sharen up to 90% cooldown reduction, which is really good, and the reason we want this is so that Sharen can spam out her abilities a lot quicker. Mainly her first ability, which will be a lot of your damage and wave clear, you'll be able to spam this one out back to back, which is really good, because you really just want to be able to shred through those waves. Now what's also going to help you shred through those waves is going to be increasing the damage, which brings us into our next section, our skill power section, with the first of our skill power mods being Electric Specialist. Now running this one because Sharen is an Electric Descendant, so this will give you a large damage increase. Then next up is Fusion Specialist. Now we're running this one because Sharen is mainly a Fusion Descendant, with 3 of her 4 abilities all being Fusion. The only one that's not is her second ability, and we're only using that for buffs, so it doesn't actually give any damage, meaning there's no damage to increase. So this makes the most sense to run as Fusion Specialist here. Now there's a quick note I need to make about Fusion Specialist. This one actually doesn't even increase your damage by a whole lot, mainly on your first ability. It only increases by about 1 to 2% in damage. So if you want any flexible mod slot, this one would be it. For example, if you want more survivability like HP, I'd recommend swapping out Fusion Specialist for that extra HP. Though in reality you shouldn't need too much survivability since you'll be permanently invisible, and the only enemies that can see you while you're invisible are Colossi. Then next up, we're going to run Dangerous Ambush for our third skill power module here. Now if you don't know what Dangerous Ambush does, while enemies are not targeting you, you get increased skill power against them, which means more damage. And this is really good because once again we're permanently invisible, so enemies can't target you. This is just a free additive skill power, which is a really hard stat to get in this game, and not many things give you that. Meaning you just get a lot of damage, and as we always say, damage is king in First Descendant. Now this actually isn't the only way you're going to get damage from skill power. There's also another stat that's going to give you a lot of damage, and that's crit. And yes, this does mean Sharen is a crit-based Descendant. And the first of these crit modules we're going to go over is going to be Front Lines. Now, why are we running Front Lines? Well, that's because it gives us both skill critical hit rate and skill crit damage. Which is good because we want the skill crit hit rate to be able to reach 100% skill crit hit rate, and the skill crit damage just for more damage, which is always good. And then next up will be Emergency Measures. Now we're running this for the same reason we're running Front Lines. It gives us skill crit hit rate and skill crit damage, which both are once again really good stats that we want. And then our third one we're going to run here is Skill Concentration. The reason being, this one just gives a lot of skill crit damage and has no downsides, which just means it's a really good one to run. Now, the reason Sharen is going to be a skill critical hit rate character in this build is because not only does she have a high amount of base crit, with it being 20% base, but her second ability also has the nice buff of while you're invisible, which we are permanently invisible, you get an additional 22% base crit, bringing it up to 42%, which makes it really easy for us to hit 100% skill critical hit rate. And thanks also to us running Blue Beetle, which we'll go over later in the build, we're just able to basically hit 100% skill critical hit rate for free. And it just ramps up our damage by a lot. In fact, allows us to one-shot pretty much everything in the game outside of, well, I guess Colossi. Though it doesn't matter how much damage we actually do if we can't actually hit our enemies. So to help with that, we're gonna run some skill effect range increase. With the only module we're gonna run here is skill expansion. Now the reason we're running this is because this is your basic skill effect range increase module that actually gives an insanely high amount for it being the basic one. And this is actually the only one we need in conjunction with our Arche Tree to be able to hit max skill effect range. So this, you'll be able to max out your first and third ability in range, which will allow you to hit a lot of enemies, which is really, really good, since our stealth, to be able to reset it and allow for that permanent invisibility, you need to either be able to kill an enemy or hit an enemy and crit on them. And that's why skill effect range is so important, is because you really want to be able to hit something every time you cast an ability to make sure you're constantly resetting that invisibility, since we really rely on that permanent invis here. And then, as always, we'll go ahead and move the Ancestor mod to its own section, where we'll go ahead and break down the Ancestor module with all of its stats and put into a tier chart, which you guys can reference to use to determine if your Ancestor modules are good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll them. Now, if you guys do want to jump to that section right now, there's a link in the description down below. There's also a part in the timestamp of the timeline of the video itself, so you can go and click on that as well. And now that we've gone over all of our basic modules, let's go ahead and hop into our trigger module. And for this, we only are going to run one trigger module, that's Tactical Disruption. Now the reason we're going to run this one is because you already have enough damage just to delete any of the basic minions slash mobs off the face of the map. So we're running Tactical Disruption to actually give us a giant power boost in damage against higher tier enemies such as tyrants, bosses, elites, commanders, all those guys. And the way this actually works for this build is if your invisibility ends next to any of those higher tier enemies, such as for example a tyrant, you get a massive amount of skill power up against any of those higher tier enemies. And some people may be wondering, well, aren't we supposed to be permanently invisible here? Well, that's actually the cool interaction here. So it turns out, when you reset your invisibility, it doesn't just reset the timer, it actually activates a whole new instance of invisibility for you. Meaning, because your first instance of invisibility ends, and now you're in a new instance of invisibility, it actually procs Tactical Disruption's passive, which is really cool. Meaning just by resetting your invisibility like you normally would do in this build, you can just get all the buffs from Tactical Disruption. Meaning, in working with also your mark, you just get a lot of damage against any of these higher tier enemies like tyrants to just delete them. Which makes them not an issue, which is really good since a lot of the new tyrants are actually fairly strong. And that's the really cool reason why we're running Tactical Disruption here. And also, I will go ahead and show this invisibility resetting in the tips and tricks, if any of you guys are wondering how this works. And let's move on to our final mod section, which is going to be our Ancestor mod section, where we'll go ahead and break up the Ancestor module, taking every single stat you can roll, and putting into a tier chart that you can go ahead and use that tier chart to determine if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. And starting with our first tier, which is going to be S tier, our best one, we're going to have skill critical hit damage, which is going to give you your highest damage increase. It's just a really good stat to roll, and it's definitely the best stat you can roll out of anything. And then we also have Fusion Skill Power Boost and Electric Skill Power Boost, and these we want for the same reason. They give you large damage increase, and they're good because Sharen is a fusion electric character, so they just give you a large damage boost because of that. Then going on to A tier, which is still a really good tier, these values will be really strong as well. We have Fusion Skill Modifier. Now, fusion skill modifier is an A tier instead of S tier because even though yes, increases your damage, it's just not as good as any ones in S tier. S tier definitely has better damage increases than this one, but it's still a damage increase, so we're going to go ahead and put an A tier. And then next up is skill effect range. And this one may seem a little odd since we're already hitting our max skill effect range on all of our damage abilities. In fact, the only one we're not is our passive. Well, it turns out because of how much range you can get from this, even though you won't be able to hit max, you'll be able to hit close enough to max. You could just have this replace the module in your mod section, meaning you can just free up a mod slot for anything you want, such as more HP or anything you might honestly prefer. And while, like I said, this won't max out your skill effect range like the module will, it'll get you close enough, so it's still a pretty good one. That's why it ends up in A tier. And then for our middle of pack values, which is B tier, we have skill duration up. This is just a okay stat to get because it does increase the duration of your invisibility. Well, yes, we are constantly refreshing our invisibility every time we get a kill. This just gives you a little bit of leeway while you're in between resetting the invisibility to just have it continuously go. That way you don't have to feel rushed to instantly get another kill, you have a little bit more wiggle room. And then max HP and defense. These are just survivability stats. More survivability is always good. And since we're using HP over shields, we have HP here instead of shields. And defense is just always good. And then for C tier. Now C tier are values that you don't really want to take no matter what, because they don't really help the build at all. And if you take them as positive values, but if you take them as negative values, they hurt the build a lot. And the first one is skill cooldown. Now the reason this is in C tier is unlike with skill effect range where we could technically replace the module, to be able to do that with skill cooldown, you basically have to have a max roll. And that's not very realistic, so we put that in C tier, because you don't want to lower your cooldown rate at all, since we want to be able to cast your first ability back to back to help with wave clear. And you can't really get above max, so it just ends up in C tier as a stat you don't want to take as positive or negative. And then we have skill critical hit rate. Now the reason why this one's in C tier is because we already hit max skill critical hit rate. We hit 100%, and we're just barely over 100%, so we can't really sacrifice any by taking it as a negative. And if we take it as a positive, it's just a dead stat because, well, you can't get over 100%, and there's nowhere in the build you'd really want to replace your skill critical hit rate with. So it just has no value here. And for our final tier, which is D tier, this is going to be the tier that if you want to take anything as a negative value, this is going to be the best tier because taking these as positives have almost little to no impact on the build, and taking them as negatives also has little to no impact on the build. Starting with skill cost here, the reason why we're fine with this one is we don't have any MP issues with the build, so increasing the costs isn't going to do anything. And then we have dimension skill power boost and dimension skill modifier. Now don't mind taking these as negatives because of the same reason. Our only ability that scales off dimension is our second ability. As we stated before, that actually doesn't do any damage, it just gives buffs. So we're fine with ruining dimension scaling because it won't actually affect that ability at all. And then next up is max MP. Now this is similar to skill cost. We don't have any MP issues, so we're fine with lowering our max MP because it really shouldn't affect the build at all. And then max shield is our final value here. This is because we're running HP instead of shields as our main survivability stat. And to be honest, shields are just a really bad stat in first Descendant right now. But that could be a discussion for another video of why they're so bad and honestly why they need to get fixed. But that will wrap up the tier chart here. So hopefully this will help you guys be able to determine if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to re-roll it and help you guys get the most out of the Sharen build. Now that we've finished out all of our module sections, let's go ahead and jump into our Arche Tree. And for this Arche Tree, we're just going to run a standard 1 Mutant Cell Arche Tree. Since Sharen can really only use the Mutant Cells in the top right, none of the other ones you could hit easily, you can really utilize. And so because of that, we're going to grab the gold skill power node on the right there. We're also going to grab a little bit of HP at the bottom of the tree here for some more survivability. And then of course we also need to hit the skill critical hit rate there in the middle. That way we can get up to 100% skill critical hit rate, which we really do want. mainly because of how crit resistance works in first Descendant. And of course, beyond that, we also want to take the crit damage. This way we can maximize our damage to the highest number possible. And now for the Mutant Cells you'll be running, you actually have 3 different options here. So the one I recommend running, and the one I personally like running, is Electrocution Vulnerability. This one's very easy to utilize. All you have to do is apply Electrocution stats to an enemy, and you can increase damage. And this works really well with Sharen's first ability because it hits in 2 parts. So your first hit will apply Electrocution stats, and then the second hit will get increased damage. Which is just a really consistent Mutant Cell that's really good. The next one is really good against higher tier enemies, and it's Electric Chain Catalyst. The reason why this one's so good is because it lowers enemies' electric resistance, and Sharen is Electric Descendant. This is just a really good option against higher tier enemies that end up getting a lot of resistance values. And then the last one is Electric Cohesion. Now, Electric Cohesion is really good against large mobs of enemies, because it allows you to stack the highest amount of skill power out of all 3 of these options. But because you actually have to go into a wave and continuously destroy the wave, you end up not getting quite as much consistency with this one. But it does have the highest potential for skill power out of all 3 of these options. And now let's go over the components that are running this build, which will be Slayer Set. And the reason we're running Slayer Set is because this gives you a nice increase in skill power, which means a nice increase in damage. And there's nothing really better in the game component set wise for Sharen to run that's going to give as much damage as this. So we just kind of default to Slayer Set. Now for the subset you'll be running here, you'll need max HP, MP recovery modifier, MP recovery in combat, and MP recovery out of combat. Anything beyond these 4, you can just take anything you want, mainly just focus on anything that gives you more survivability. And then for the component cores that you'll want to run, you'll want 4 max HP, since this is going to be the most efficient stat on Sharen, defensive wise, 2 defensive cores, just for more survivability, and your last 2 can be 2 free cores. You can just put in whatever you want there, depending on what you're fighting. So if you're fighting toxic enemies, toxic resistance cores, fire enemies, fire resistant cores, or if you just want good general ones, you can just go ahead and run 4 defensive cores in total, which just makes it once again a really good general set. Now let's go ahead and move on to Inversion Reinforcement, with our first node being Adrenaline Surge. We're just running this because it's a nice little burst of movement speed, which is always fun to get. But then we'll run Selective Stimulation here. This will be nice just in case you're missing any HP, just a nice little heal. And then deploy Hardened Shell because you get percentile damage reduction for any damage you're taken, which is just always a nice stat to get. Now, you shouldn't actually take too much damage since you're constantly invisible, but this just helps with any AoE damage you'll take. In fact, all 3 of these nodes aren't necessary for the build, but these are just kind of the best ones you're going to be able to run, since Sharen's builds already works without all of these. And now let's go ahead and move on to our reactor for this build. So for this, we're going to be running a Fusion Electric Reactor, since as we stated earlier in the video, Sharen is a Fusion Electric Descendant. So of course we want this to do the maximum amount of damage we can do. And for your substats, your first one, you're going to want Skill Crit Damage up. This is going to maximize your damage. And then for your second substat, you're either going to want Fusion Skill Power Boost or Electric Skill Power Boost. And the reason why we only want damage here for the reactor is because our mods and our Arche Tree already give us all the other stats we need, so we only really need damage here. And let's finally get into the weapon that I mentioned back in the mod section, Blue Beetle. Now, this is a necessary weapon to run here. We actually really do need this because of its passive. With its passive being, every time you cast a fusion ability, which 3 of the 4 abilities Sharen has are fusion, you get a massive increase in skill critical hit rate. And this is really important because this is what allows us to not have to run something like Skill Insight in our mod section and still be able to hit 100% skill critical hit rate. In fact, this is pretty much the only thing you really need a Blue Beetle, but there are a couple ways you can slightly improve the gun as well for this build. One of those being you can run 2 yellow cores, with either yellow core being 2 sprint speed, which is what I prefer, or I know some people also prefer a grappling hook as well, so you can also run 2 of those. The only issue with grappling hook is if you do the grappling hook trick to extend out the range of your grapple hook, you actually can end Sharen's invisibility, I'll show some tips and tricks section, but this is the main reason why I prefer sprint speed over grappling hook. There's also 2 modules you can run as well. Remote detonator is pretty good because it spreads out your electrocution when you defeat an enemy. And then defense master is just really good for some extra survivability. Once again, all you really need is Blue Beetle itself. All these just kind of help Blue Beetle in the build and be able to bring out its max potential. And now let's get into the tips and tricks section where I'll show you guys a couple things to make Sharen even more enjoyable to play. So the first one has to do with the trigger module and proccing it. Like I said, show it back in the trigger module section. So how this one activates is when you use an invisibility ability, which will be shared in a second. It sets it up. And then it turns out, even though it says you have to end that ability, because it technically counts as a reset there, you're able to just proc it off the reset. Since it's not actually resetting the timer, it's just actually giving you a whole new proc of the ability. The only unfortunate thing is, even if you do that, to set up the next one, you're going to have to redo your invisibility activation. Say if I do this, even if we wait out the timer for it to reset, there it is, you see it won't proc, but we can recast our invisibility, and there it procs again. Which also the nice thing is because once you get a kill, or after you get your first reset, actually will put your second ability on cooldown, meaning you can just reactivate while you're invisible, which is a really nice utility thing to be able to use. The other thing I wanted to show you guys, and this is the other thing I mentioned in the video, was with the grapple hook. So normally, as most people know, for grapple hook mechanic, you do a melee at the end to extend it out. But turns out, because it's counted as an attack, since this is technically a melee attack, if you do invisibility and do it, and we'll just do it there, as soon as you land, it actually ends it. So you guys just need to be wary of that if you do accidentally use a melee while using a grapple hook, or you just choose you want grapple hooks over movement speed, it's just something you guys need to be wary about that you will accidentally cancel out your invisibility. And of course, it does actually deactivate on your bike, but if you get the reset, for whatever reason, it doesn't deactivate the invisibility. I don't know why that interaction exists, but yeah, if you're on the reset of your invisibility, your bike's technically invisible too. It's just a weird interaction, and a funny one that I wanted to show. But that'll wrap it up for the tips and tricks, and that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for the Sharen Build video. I've been having a lot of fun with this build. It's a pretty safe build too. I think the only issue I've had with the build so far is because you're permanently invisible, the enemies don't swarm around you and get a little bit more scattered. But let me know what you guys thought about the build video down in the comments section below. Or if you have any questions, also go ahead and hit me up down there as well. And if you guys did like the video, or you plan to use the build, I'd appreciate you hitting that like button. It helps the video out a lot. And also, if you want to know when new videos are going to come out, don't forget that subscribe button. Also, I do stream most days on Twitch. I'll go and throw up the information there on screen. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, I really would appreciate it. It helps the video get out to a lot more people. But that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this video. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll catch y'all again next time.